When the tears are rolling down like a river to the ocean, and there's no one else around, you won't question my devotion. Everybody needs somebody, and you got me. You know that I know that you know that I'll be there for the highs and lows. Give you mine if your heart gets broke. By your side when you're all alone, I will be there. When you're down and down on your luck, no ride home and you got too drunk. 2 a.m. I'ma pick you up. I will be there. I'll be there, I'll be there, I'll be there for you. I'll be there, I'll be there, I'll be there for you. When you're down and down on your luck, no ride home and you got too drunk. Whoa, I'll be there, I'll be there, I'll be there for you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Voices of Serenity. I am your host, Heather, and tonight we have a special guest. Her name is Marcie Maxfield, and she is an author, and we are going to be discussing her book titled M's Awful Good Fortune, as well as quite a few other things. So, Marcie, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Hi, Heather, and hi, everybody out there. It's good to be here. I'm here to talk about M's Awful Good Fortune. And the title actually was not the working title, but the title came, my publisher helped come up with this, and it works on so many levels, but it does actually tie very much into this theme that runs through the book of having the character having PTSD. So I'll get into that. And if you could see the cover, if you could see the cover, and you will when you go see it online or in a bookstore, it's about my travels as an expat wife living in Paris, Tokyo, Shanghai, and I'm from Detroit. And my son, who's about 30, immediately picked up on PTSD from Paris, Tokyo, Shanghai, and Detroit. So I gave him points for that.
Aw.
Yeah, because he got it immediately. So this is a story about marriage and compromise. It's not a story about sexual assault, although the character, who is based on my life, but this is a fiction, so it's actually called autofiction. I should sort of talk about what autofiction is. Autofiction is a category that uses the authenticity of memoir, but it marries it with a literary voice. So I've worked really hard, and not worked really hard. This character M kind of took over the book. I started it out as a memoir about my experience living overseas, and the character M just became this larger than life, and she took over the whole story. And she had PTSD. And I didn't initially set out to write about this experience that I had had as a young woman, that I had been I have a line in a slam poem that I have called Rape Me that says, I'm sort of an expert on rape. I've been raped, date raped, and dated a rapist. That last one was on me. That's what I used to think. My bad. So I have written a lot about rape, but I did not set out to write this book about it. But this character had all the markings of a woman with PTSD. She has anxiety. She has a lot of fears. The first time she moved overseas to Korea, her left arm just stopped working. This did happen to me. It's the first time I felt that out of control in my marriage, because I had quit a job and followed my husband and taken my children to South Korea. And I was completely lost and uncomfortable, and my left arm just stopped working.
Oh.
that never happened again until we moved back to LA. And the next time we moved to Paris, and we flew to Colorado for, this isn't in the book, this is my personal story. We flew to Colorado and for a cultural immersion program about the French, so that we would know what we were get along in Paris. And my left arm stopped working again, and I couldn't hook my own bra. I just couldn't lift my arm.
That's
And
wild.
it's wild. It is. And later I just developed a number of fears that came out. This character has different kinds of fears, but she's afraid to ride in the elevators in Paris because they're those small elevators and it's claustrophobic. So she's got claustrophobia. When she goes to Shanghai, she's afraid to ride the elevators up onto the 50th floor and to look over the balcony because she's afraid of heights. She's afraid of cockroaches. She's constantly checking her breasts for lumps. Her children think she's completely neurotic, and I think she says it's not neurotic if it's based in reality. And for her, even though these events of having been date raped and having been raped and having actually dated a serial rapist happened to her in her 20s, they didn't get triggered until her 30s when she moved to, her anxiety didn't get triggered until she moved to Korea. And they didn't seem to be really related to her current life, but they were there in her subconscious. And they came out in her character. And she has full-on anxiety attacks and panic attacks. And at some point, I realized that I had to write a rape scene into the book because otherwise none of it made sense. And so I did. But I'm really careful about pointing out that this is not a survivor's book. This is not a book about rape. This is a woman's story about dealing with marriage and compromise. And I use a metaphor in the book that she has a childhood accident, and the character, and she has a limp that she turns into a swagger. And that's really how I view being a survivor. It's a young adult accident. It has left a permanent sort of on my psyche. And on a good day, I turn it into swagger. And it's just another way in which women walk in this world and are marginalized.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of where I'm going with why this tied into my book, because it is a book about a woman who loves her husband very much, but he's a bit of a misogynist, and he completely marginalizes her life and her career. He takes jobs all over the world, requiring her to quit her jobs and follow him. And I guess it came out in my book, and it was my subconscious. It came out in my book, and I realized that it actually triggered these feelings of being powerless in the face of the patriarchy, like powerless in this relationship, powerless when a stranger breaks into your apartment, powerless when you go on a date and somebody spikes your drink. All these different ways that men have traditionally gotten away with marginalizing women.
Right.
So that's kind of my book in a nutshell. Also a very, I want to say it's a funny book. Junot Diaz, the Pulitzer Prize winning author of The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, I'm very fortunate to have gotten a blurb from him.
Aww.
And yeah, his blurb says, I'll read you this because I really kind of like it. Equally funny and brutal. because that is really what the book is. It's funny, it's brutal. Some of these scenes in the marriage are brutal. Some of these scenes in her life are brutal. And yet she's an invincible character. And she's got a sense of humor that carries her through all of these events, all of these things that happen to her.
I know that I have the book right here in front of me because, I can't thank you enough for sending me a copy. And I'm so excited to read this book. I've had it on my pile of books that I have, and this is right there on the top. I'm very excited to read it. And it's funny that you made mention of the PTSD, because I've looked at this book several times and I never noticed that.
Yeah, it's subtle, but it's interesting. It's subtle, but it's intentional, because in fact I'm from Detroit, and that is in the book. But I lived in Paris, Tokyo, Shanghai, and Seoul, and but I didn't use Seoul. I swapped it for Detroit because of the D. I thought, oh yeah, that works. And I do call myself a girl from the D, even though I'm based in Los Angeles and have lived all over the world. And I think it's just a subtle nod. And I think you can tell from the book cover, there's the title, and there's a suitcase, and behind the suitcase there's a dark shadow.
Yes.
So it's interesting, because people look at this character's life. She's a tag-along wife. She's lived in all of these major global cities, and they look at her and they think, you have the most fabulous life. What are you complaining about? And there's a dark side of that. And that's essentially what the police said to me when I was sexually assaulted. A guy in a ski mask came into my apartment, and I ended up jumping out the window. And the police said, you were lucky. Because it could have been worse, because he was a violent serial rapist who was actually, I don't want to get into too many details from the book, but I was lucky. I was lucky because I jumped out the window. And then later, the next day, I wanted to drive home to see my mother, because I had been living in Ohio at the time. I wanted to drive back to Detroit. And I got pulled over for speeding.
Oh, wow.
And a cop I said, officer, I'm really sorry. I know I'm speeding. I was raped yesterday, and I'm just driving home to get to Detroit to see my mother. And he said, did you make a police report? And I said, yes, of course. And he went back to his car, and then he came to the window and he said, oh, well, I saw your police report, and it doesn't say you were raped. It says you were sexually assaulted.
Oh, wow.
So he wrote me a ticket. He wrote me such a big ticket. It was a big ass ticket, and it required a personal appearance.
Oh my goodness.
And this is where my humor comes in, because I laugh about it. I mean, I'm angry, and my book is angry and funny, but it took a long time for me to be able to sit down and write about these events. But I do remember saying to him, do you have a daughter? And he said, yes. And I said, well, I hope one day she's as lucky as I am. And I think that my work speaks to this concept that we as women are considered lucky. Not if we survive rape.
Right.
Like, I mean, you have a better idea than I do what the statistics are. I think they're somewhere around 25% of women, but I don't know that for sure. But I mean, it's a pretty high statistic, and it's holding for this next generation the same as it was for my generation. And
Absolutely.
it's a problem in our country, and it's not going away. And so while I wanted to write this book about the expat world, it turned into a bigger statement about feminism. And I'm happy that I included this, because it's one of the things that are important to me, issues that's important to me. And it's the idea that this is just a woman, and this is one of the experiences that happened to her, because there are so many of us out there, and it's our story. And often when we watch movies that are read books or watch movies that are about rape, they're somewhat, I don't want to say gratuitous, but that's the focus of it. And I wanted to come at it from sideways to say, we don't have to focus on it, but we need to acknowledge that it's just part of the collective experience of women in this country.
I definitely like that. Because it helps put those who have been raped and sexually assaulted, it understanding what had happened and being able to collect everything, within you to move on and, do things like that. They're not being stuck in that victim mindset. They're being able to transform into a survivor mindset,
Right.
and outlook. So I do agree. I think that is very important.
Right, and I think that this character M is definitely uh, a strong, badass survivor of a woman, but she is a survivor. So these things do come up in these quirky ways that her family calls her neurotic. But it's just, like I said, it's like a limp. It's just something that you don't get rid of, but
Right.
you find your inner strength, and you find your sense. For me, I found my sense of humor, and because I did not want to be destroyed by these experiences.
I love it. I'm so excited to read this.
Oh, good. I'm excited for you to read it. I'm excited for all of your listeners to read it. Is there anything, any other direction you want to go about this? I can read that poem if an excerpt from it. I can
Yes,
talk
you can
about
certainly
other
do that.
things, or I can talk about the other thing. I think because I'm better when I read my words. I'm not going extemporaneously off the cuff. How's this? Okay, this is an excerpt because it's a fairly long piece, and it's called "Rape Me," and it was a play that I did in Los Angeles at the Hollywood Fringe, which won an award, so I'm very proud of it. And I, though, am not the actor typically, but I'll read my work. All right, here we go. I've already started it. I'm sort of an expert on rape. I've been raped, date raped, and dated a rapist. That last one was on me. That's what I used to think. My bad. When a total stranger in a ski mask broke into my apartment, I went from bad to lucky. That's what the police said. You're lucky. It could have been worse. Lucky for girls is not being beaten or killed. Raped, date raped, dated a rapist. This makes me a statistical anomaly, a superhero of misfortune with the bad luck of 100 women. Or maybe it just makes me an American woman. I'm your mother, I'm your daughter, I'm your sister, I'm your friend. I'm the waitress at the campus diner, the girlfriend who flinches when you sneak up behind her. That crazy chick on the bus who went off on a stranger for standing too close, that was me. At 23, I was diagnosed with PTSD, like a soldier returning from Iraq or Afghanistan. My tour of duty, growing up girl in America. So that's my
That was
excerpt.
powerful.
Thank you. So yeah, it's
I got chills.
yeah, my play was a series of 10 different pieces that related to my experience. It was called Growing Up Girl, so it related to my experience as a woman, the female experience, and that piece took the house down every time. Every time. It just was a little ahead of its time because it was before #MeToo.
Oh wow.
And I remember that afterwards on closing night, we were at a bar nearby and we're having drinks. And I was sitting next to a guy who didn't know I was the playwright. And he started talking to me and he brought up this piece and he said, yeah, I really didn't believe it. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, that couldn't all happen to one person.
Oh goodness.
And I said, did you know I wrote it? Because it can. and he was sure that it couldn't. And that speaks to so much of the masculine denial of what's really going on with women, because we as women do know that that it can happen.
Oh, yes.
And so that was an interesting moment. And so this is, but let's start my book. It's coming out in August. It's on She Writes Press. It is funny. It's getting, it's a global romp. And it is, I think it brings up a lot of things in marriage that people don't usually talk about. So I think it'll be a fun read for people. It's a marriage that goes through a lot of tough times, but comes out on the bright side of the road.
I'm so excited to read this. I feel like, based on what I've heard with this novel so far, I feel like there's a lot of different things, you know, even outside of the sexual assault that is mentioned within it and tied into it. I feel like there's a lot of things that are relatable.
Yes, thank you. Yes. I think that it, as I said, I started to write this as a memoir, as a love letter for tag-along wives, women who are, it's this little section of society who are in marriages that take them overseas. But in a way, I often say that, just to put this in perspective, that Michelle Obama is the ultimate tag-along wife, because she was a successful, powerful attorney in Chicago when Barack got into politics, and she did have to give up her career and move to the White House. So she's like a big shining example of the experience of being in a marriage that requires typically the woman to sacrifice her chosen career and then to completely remake herself, which is what it's about, which is, so I started it as writing about that experience as a love letter, and then I realized that my voice is so feminist that it took a different, it was like, well, it's a love letter, but it also became a feminist exploration of how women are marginalized in marriage and in the work world. And then, of course, it had to tie into my experiences as a survivor of sexual assault. So it all sort of made sense.
Yes. Yeah, it all intertwines with it.
Right.
Within each other.
And I like to say, did you read Michelle Obama's book, Becoming?
I did not.
Okay, it was like the biggest book release, I think, 2 years ago. Like astonished. Like, she was going on a book tour where she was filling concert halls, like, like she was a rock star. Okay, well, she is a rock star. And it was a really good book, and it was a surprising honest book from a woman who is who was the first lady and is a former first lady. So she was surprisingly honest about many of the challenges in terms of loss of community and a loss of her identity, and who were uprooted. And as I read this book, I thought, oh, that's my experience. And I was writing, my book was already pretty much done by then. And I was like, wow, I never thought about that. But we have these parallel universes where our lives are, I mean, I'm sure that Michelle, wherever you are, Michelle, that you and I could sit down for a glass of wine and we wouldn't stop talking, because we would totally get what each of us has gone through. But where I differ, or where I diverge from Michelle, is that I'm not the former first lady. So I get down in the dirt with my story. So my story is a lot more raw and authentic. Nothing to take away from Michelle Obama, whose book was amazing. But as I said, I'm just me, Marcie Maxfield. I don't have that whole persona to protect. So I'm proud of the authenticity that I brought to this book. while at the same time pushing it into something that is a literary read, and not and beyond a memoir, in that this character M, while she has many similarities to me, she's a very extreme version, shall we say. She's definitely a fictional character.
That is awesome.
I began to write this book. Sure, I began around the time of the Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump campaign, and it was the news, everything was so just it was a bombardment. Even before the election, it was a bombardment. And
Right.
I thought, I had gone to the Women's March, I had marched in Washington, and I was fired up. And then I realized that, and then after the election, when Trump won, I thought I could spend the next 4 years watching the news religiously and rallying against the talking heads and the politicians in the White House and everything, or I can turn inward and make a creative piece of art that is a place for me to channel these feelings that I have. And I think that I made the wise choice. That I sat down at my computer and I just said, I'm going to write this book. I'm in the next 4 years, I'm going to, at the end of it, I'm going to have something to show for it, not other than an ulcer. So, and I'm really so happy with that decision. First of all, it helped me get through the book because it was such an amazing creative process, but also I was able to use everything that was going on in the world to bring it into my story and make my story much more relevant and more universal as a woman's story.
Yes.
Thank you, Heather, for inviting me and letting me come on and talk to you and to your listeners. This has been a real treat. This is a subject that I think about all the time, but I rarely address a community that's also thinking about it. And so it's been a pleasure to come here and share my story.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and talking about your book and all the amazing things that tie into it. And I tell you what, I'm going to be getting to this book here really soon now that school's getting out and I don't have to go to bed so early. So I would actually love to have you back on after the book is read and we can chat about it.
Oh, I would love to do that. Seriously, that's great. Thank you, Heather.
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. All right, good.
All right, awesome. So thank you everybody for checking in, and do not forget to check out the description about tonight's episode. It will have all of Marcie's information and for her book, M's Awful Good Fortune.
Thank you. Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye.
Bye.